In the mid-70s, Elvis Presley walked into a Memphis hospital ward. Doctors paused. Nurses stopped moving. At the far end, a child lay fighting for his last breaths. Elvis didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked straight toward that bed, and what happened next left the entire staff speechless. If stories of kindness and courage move you, stay with me to the very end. And if you've ever seen music bring healing, share this video so more people feel the power of compassion. The ward door swung open, and in that instant, everything stopped. A nurse balancing a tray of instruments froze mid-step, the metal clattering against each other with a sharp ring. A doctor cut off his sentence halfway. The only sound left was the steady hiss of oxygen and the faint beep of heart monitors. Elvis Presley had walked in. It was the mid-1970s, Memphis. Some staff had whispered earlier that he might come, but few believed it. Now he stood there in a long, dark coat draped over his stage clothes, collar turned up as if he had just come from the cold. His hair was immaculate, black and gleaming, sideburns sharp under the harsh hospital lights. The scent of antiseptic filled the corridor. But in that moment, everyone swore the air itself changed. Patients craned their necks, nurses whispered. One orderly nearly dropped a clipboard. Elvis didn't wave. He didn't flash the famous smile. His eyes locked on something at the far end of the room. A boy, barely 7 years old, frail against the starched white sheets. His chest rose shallowly, each breath pulled through clear tubes taped to his nose. The child's skin was pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent glow. His small hands rested limp on the blanket, a stuffed toy rabbit tucked beside his side. The boy's mother stood nearby, her hands clasped tightly together. She didn't move when Elvis entered. She just watched him, lips pressed thin, as though all her prayers had led to this moment. Elvis began walking, each step echoing faintly on the linoleum floor. The click of his boots seemed louder than it should have been, each sound pulling the ward tighter into silence. He passed rows of patients, each head turning as if drawn by gravity. One nurse whispered, "He's going straight for the child," and he was. He didn't greet the crowd. He didn't acknowledge the dozens of eyes on him. His gaze didn't waver from the boy's fragile frame. Witnesses later recalled that his expression was unreadable, not the dazzling showman, not the swaggering rock idol. Something else. A man carrying the weight of what he saw. As he reached the bedside, Elvis stopped. He stood still for a long moment, just looking down at the boy. His coat shifted slightly as he lowered himself into a crouch. For the first time, the staff saw softness in his eyes. The boy's breathing hitched. A weak cough rattled from his throat. The machines around him ticked steadily, one of them spiking as though even his body knew who had arrived. The mother swallowed hard. Witnesses say she mouthed a single word, "Please." Elvis slowly reached forward. His hand rested gently on the blanket, just near the boy's small arm. The child stirred faintly, his eyelids fluttering open. For a second, it seemed like he was trying to focus, as if through the blur of pain he recognized the figure beside him. Doctors shifted on their feet, glancing at each other. What was he going to do? No one dared speak. Even the hospital air conditioning seemed to fade away. Elvis leaned slightly closer, his shadow falling across the boy's pillow. He didn't speak. Not yet. He just looked at him, eyes steady, jaw tight, as though he was holding something back. And then, almost imperceptibly, Elvis inhaled deeply. His chest rose. His lips parted as if he might speak, or perhaps sing. The staff held their breath. Something was about to happen. What would Elvis do next, in front of a dying child and a room frozen in silence? The boy coughed, a thin, ragged sound that broke the silence Elvis had created. His chest rose shallowly, ribs pressing against skin with every labored breath. The faint rattle of his lungs filled the space louder than any applause ever could. His mother, standing at the bedside, clutched something in her trembling hands. A piece of cardboard, edges bent from being held too tightly. In uneven black marker it read, "Sing for my son." She turned to Elvis, voice quivering. "Please," she whispered, barely audible over the hiss of the oxygen line. "Please." Sing. The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile as glass. A nurse pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes already shining. Elvis lowered himself slowly, easing down until one knee touched the cold tile. His dark coat brushed against the boy's blanket. With deliberate care, he laid one hand flat across the thin fabric, just near the child's arm. The boy stirred faintly at the touch, eyelids fluttering open again. The machines beside the bed spoke in their own language, the steady beep of the monitor, the slow pull and sigh of the oxygen tank. Each sound measured time, measured breath, measured hope. Witnesses recall Elvis leaning closer, his voice quiet and steady. "What's your name, son?" The boy's lips moved, but no sound came at first. He tried again, a faint breath carrying only part of the word. His mother bent low, whispering it in Elvis's ear. Elvis nodded once. He repeated the name softly, almost reverently, letting the boy hear it in his unmistakable voice. The child blinked, recognition flickering faintly in tired eyes. The room seemed to lean forward. Nurses, doctors, even patients propped in nearby beds, all waiting for what might happen next. One doctor whispered, "This can't be real," but it was. Elvis kept his hands steady on the blanket, grounding the child, anchoring him. Then he shifted slightly back, his eyes scanning the room, almost as though searching for something beyond these walls. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate. His chest rose in a slow breath, his lips parting. But instead of singing, he simply straightened up, and then, with a subtle gesture, he raised one hand in the air. Not high, not dramatic, just enough. Those who knew his stage shows recognized it instantly. The signal, the one he used to call his band to attention. But here there was no band, no spotlight. Only the sterile glow of hospital fluorescence and the mechanical pulse of machines. The staff looked at each other in disbelief. What was he doing? Was he about to turn a hospital ward into a stage? The boy's mother clutched her son's hand tighter, tears spilling freely now. Nurses leaned forward, one pressing her palm against her chest. Elvis's hand held steady in the air, fingers spread slightly. His eyes closed for just a moment, and then he drew in a breath, deeper than before. The room braced itself. Elvis was about to begin, but with no instruments. No band. How could he possibly fill that silence? No guitars, no drums, no stage lights, just the faint hum of machines and the antiseptic smell of a hospital ward. Yet Elvis Presley stood at the bedside, hand raised, as if an invisible orchestra waited on his command. Then, without warning, he began to sing. The first note was low, almost fragile, not the booming voice that had filled arenas, but a quiet melody shaped for one child. "Love me tender." The words floated into the sterile air, soft but steady. pressing through the silence like sunlight breaking into a dark room. Nurses gasped, hands lifting instinctively to their mouths. One orderly blinked rapidly, as if trying to convince himself this was real. The mother clutched her son's hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. The boy's breathing shifted. The shallow, ragged rhythm slowed. The heart monitor steadied, its beep aligning with Elvis's pacing. Witnesses would later swear the child's chest rose with more strength than it had in days. Elvis didn't look at the staff. He didn't look at the crowd gathering at the edges of the ward. His eyes stayed fixed on the boy, every word meant for him alone. The boy's eyelids fluttered. His lips trembled, as if he wanted to respond but couldn't find the strength. The second line carried more power. Elvis's voice deepened, warmth filling the cold hospital air. "Love me, sweet, never let me go." The notes hung above the machines, drowning out their mechanical sighs. A nurse leaned against the wall, tears streaming silently. A doctor, hardened from years of watching patients fade, looked down, unable to mask the lump rising in his throat. Halfway through the stanza, Elvis paused for a fraction of a second. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a silk scarf, pale blue with a soft sheen under the fluorescent lights. Slowly, deliberately, he placed it on the boy's chest. The gesture froze everyone. The scarf, something Elvis often gave away at concerts, seemed out of place here, yet somehow perfect. A piece of his stage world offered to a child who might never step outside these hospital walls again. The mother sobbed openly now, shoulders shaking, tears falling onto the bedsheet. She mouthed the words, along with Elvis, her voice too broken to join aloud, and still Elvis sang. The final words of the stanza came softer, nearly whispered, as though spoken only for the boy's ears. The hush that followed was heavier than applause, more profound than silence. Then a flicker, the child's lips moved. Barely, but they moved at first. No sound came out. Then, faintly, almost inaudible, he formed two small words. A nurse gasped. Another covered her face. The boy was trying to sing. His voice cracked, more breath than tone, but he pushed it out anyway, chasing Elvis's melody with all the strength he had left. Elvis leaned forward, eyes wide, a faint smile breaking across his face. The impossible was happening. Would this fragile duet continue? Or would the boy's strength vanish as quickly as it had appeared? The boy's lips moved again, and this time a faint sound slipped out. A whisper of melody, fragile as tissue paper, but clear enough to recognize. The last two words of the line came from his mouth, almost lost in the hum of machines. "Love you so." The ward gasped as one. Nurses covered their mouths. A doctor muttered, "Dear God." Elvis's eyes locked on the child, his expression softening into something no one had seen on stage. He leaned closer, still singing, voice steady and low, guiding the boy through each phrase. The child's voice wavered, sometimes vanishing, sometimes catching, but he pushed through, matching Elvis's rhythm in short bursts. Each syllable cost him precious breath, yet he refused to let go. The heart monitor steadied again. Its tone, once erratic, now fell in sync with the slow cadence of their duet. Elvis gave a small nod, encouragement without words. He squeezed the boy's hand gently, anchoring him in place. The mother pressed both hands over her mouth, tears streaming freely down her face. She looked from her son to Elvis, shaking her head in disbelief. Her lips formed silent words, "Thank you." Nurses leaned against the wall, some wiping at their eyes, others gripping each other's arms. One orderly whispered, "He's giving him a stage." And it was true. The white sheets had become a spotlight. The boy, frail and pale, was no longer just a patient, he was a partner in song. Elvis shifted slightly, dropping his voice to a near murmur, letting the boy's tiny contributions carry more weight. The room bent forward, straining to hear. Even the machines seemed to hush between beats. The duet stumbled, broke, then rejoined. A word missed, another caught. But the boy's determination grew, and each successful note felt like a victory. For a fleeting moment, the ward was no longer a hospital. It was a concert hall, filled with music that had no need for amplifiers or guitars. Only two voices, one legendary, one fragile, rising together. Elvis's smile deepened, faint but unmistakable. He whispered between lines, "That's it, son. You're doing it." Doctors exchanged looks, their professional detachment gone. Some later admitted they had never seen willpower change a child's body so visibly. Even briefly, that as the song reached its close, Elvis leaned forward again, lowering his voice almost to a prayer. The boy, exhausted, formed the last syllable with him, then fell back against the pillow, chest heaving but eyes still open. The silence that followed was overwhelming. No applause, no cheers, just the heavy breath of those who had witnessed it. Elvis bowed his head, squeezing the boy's hand one last time. His lips moved again, but this time not in song. He leaned toward the mother, whispering words too soft for the staff to hear. She froze, her eyes widening, then nodded quickly, clutching her son's arm as though to anchor his spirit. Elvis stood slowly, his dark coat shifting as he straightened. The scarf remained on the boy's chest, rising and falling with every shallow breath. The king looked around the ward once, not as a performer, but as a man. His gaze lingered on the nurses, then on the doctor who stood wiping his glasses with a trembling hand, and then, without another word, he turned slightly back toward the mother, his hand brushing her shoulder for the briefest second. The staff leaned in, straining. What had he whispered? What promise had he made? None of them knew in that moment. But within days, the answer would arrive in a small package that changed everything. 3 days after the visit, a knock echoed through the hospital corridor. The boy's mother opened the door to find a deliverer man holding a plain cardboard box. No fanfare, no crowd, just a package with her family's name written neatly on the label. She carried it inside, setting it on the chair beside her son's bed. The boy stirred faintly, eyes drifting toward the box. His breathing was weaker now, every inhale a fight, every exhale a fragile victory. Slowly, carefully, she opened it. Inside lay a small acoustic guitar, polished wood gleaming softly under the fluorescent lights. Resting against its strings was an envelope. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, the paper heavy, the handwriting bold. The note inside reads simply, "You'll always have music beside you." Elvis, the mother broke down instantly, clutching the letter to her chest. Nurses gathered around, reading the words in disbelief. One nurse whispered, "He actually sent this." Another muttered, "I've never seen anything like it." The boy, though too weak to hold the guitar, managed a faint smile when it was placed gently across his lap. His tiny fingers twitched against the polished wood, tracing the curve as though memorizing its shape. From that moment, the ward became something different. Staff began stopping by not just to check monitors, but to see the guitar, to read the note again. Some said it felt like the whole hospital carried a new kind of hush, one built not on fear, but on reverence. Witnesses later recalled that Elvis never spoke publicly about the visit, never sought recognition. But in this quiet act, he had left behind a living echo of his presence. Days passed. The boy's condition worsened. His breaths grew shorter, his body weaker. Some staff admitted they doubted he would see another week. Yet each time the mother touched the guitar's strings, each time she whispered the words of love me tender into his ear, his eyes flickered open. One doctor later described it. It was as if the gift itself carried a piece of him, a reminder that even in the hardest hours, they weren't alone. The guitar became more than an object. It became a promise, a link between a fading child and a star who had refused to let him go unnoticed. When the boy passed weeks later, his mother placed the scarf Elvis had left folded across the guitar, tucking both into a chest she would keep for the rest of her life. She told friends they were his treasures and mine. Decades later, visitors to the family home would still be shown that chest. The scarf, aged but intact. The guitar, strings still humming faintly when touched. And always, the note for simple words written in Elvis's hand. Staff from that hospital continued to speak of it for years. One nurse, interviewed late in life, said, "I watched miracles in medicine, but that day, I watched a miracle in kindness." He didn't just sing, he gave them something to hold on to. The story spread quietly, shared between those who had been there and those who wished they had. It was never a headline, never a staged photo opportunity. It was, instead, a memory passed along like a sacred secret. But one question lingered among everyone who had been present. What exactly did Elvis whisper to the mother before he left the ward? The answer would come years later, when a nurse finally revealed the promise that had been made in that moment of silence. Years later, when most of the staff had moved on, one nurse finally revealed the words Elvis had whispered to the boy's mother. He told her, "No child should ever feel forgotten. I'll make sure he knows he mattered." The nurse, now elderly, recalled the moment with tears in her eyes. "He didn't come in as Elvis the star," she said softly. "He came in as a man who cared." The scarf Elvis had placed on the boy's chest still exists, folded carefully in the family's keepsake chest. The guitar remains alongside it, strings a little worn, wood aged but intact. To visitors, the mother would often say, "These are proof that kindness is louder than fame." Hospital staff who witnessed the visit carried the memory through their careers. Some said it changed how they approached patients, not just as bodies to be healed, but as souls to be seen. For years after, whenever Love Me Tender played on the hospital radio, nurses would stop in their tracks, their minds pulled back to that sacred silence in the ward. It's been told that Elvis never mentioned the visit, never sought attention. But maybe that was the point. His gift wasn't for headlines. It was for one boy, one mother, and the handful of strangers who watched a hospital room transform into a stage of compassion. The boy's life ended too soon, but the moment endured. The duet that shouldn't have happened became a story retold across decades, proof that even the briefest acts of kindness can echo longer than applause. Elvis's gift wasn't survival. It was dignity. It was love offered at the edge of life, and a reminder that sometimes music outlasts medicine. If this story touched you, share it with someone who believes music can heal the soul. And tell me in the comments, If you could hear just one song in your final moments, what would it be?